So the recording has started. Some are still coming. I see the numbers going up in the virtual world, but I think that it's time to begin. So my name is Mika Hyytiäinen. I used to be a military professor in the National Defense University, but I made my dissertation in the geographic information almost 20 years ago at the moment. When we first started to think, is the map still meaningful, and why do we make not so good maps that we used to do in the back good old days? We had the first seminar, and then when we started to discuss what's going to be the next seminar, we made a decision to take a forward leap in the world which actually doesn't have maybe the maps at all. But I try to explain you why we did it. If you think the topic, the most important part in the topic is the question mark, because this is now we are starting to wondering if there are maps in the 3D, and what are the good maps in the 3D, if there are some. If you think about the old school maps, they used to be like works of art. So the information was put into the paper, or maybe even in the sheet of something else, like not paper, in a way that you really had to think what you are trying to express. Well, the old schoolers, the oldies like me, we still like maps like GT maps, the Gran Turismo map at 200,000, which I buy every time when when I go to abroad and drive my car. I still buy maps, not just use my navigator, and they were quite good. Then they came to thematic maps, which started to be layers done by computers, and nowadays the computers are making the maps. And there's a lot of hurry when we are making the maps, and actually what we had last time as a kind of conclusion is that there's still a lot space for cartography and the old principles how to make good maps, and the computers are not automized ways of doing good maps. They are very good making maps, but in many cases the maps are not that good. They may even be bad maps. But then we started to discuss, how about 3D, because 3D is everywhere. We are talking about 3D words, and we will see a lot of examples in today about the 3D things. Well, the oldest 3D map that I have used was a sandbox in military academy. So it was a sandbox, a real box of sand, where there were little trees, and it was a sandbox from Santahamina. And we started to discuss about tactics in the sandbox. And we didn't put little soldiers in there, we just pointed it out. But it was part of the Santahamina area where we were discussing first with the sandbox how to make tactics before we actually went there in the real world. The oldest days for me as a military guy were flight simulators, and actually artillery simulator was the first thing that I saw. You actually had the artillery there, and it was the key point. But when they started to make the background for that, all the background had to be made almost by hand, so it was really expensive. And of course, the computers weren't like this, like they are today. So they were really heavy to visualize the background. So you actually had to make a lot of decisions how to use the background, so that the artillery fire, that was actually the topic, the theme of the whole simulator, would work in that way that people also could understand where they are shooting, not just how they are shooting. And my claim is that on those days, also in the 3D world, you actually had to use the cartographic principles quite a lot, because you had you had time, but it was very a lot of work, and you had to optimize a lot so that the background was not the whole topic. But as you know, nowadays the computers are so good that actually the words, the digital twins, start to be so good that we actually are moving into the world where actually we are putting things into the virtual world. And it's like, for me, it's like putting normal two-dimensional maps in the like pictures, air graphic pictures, and then putting your obstacles or things in there. And actually, this is not mapping. It's more like creating a word that is almost the same as our physical word, and then trying to put those things in there. But we are putting virtual things in the maps. We are putting things like noise. We are putting things like 5G networks. We are putting things like LiDAR that we can't actually see in the physical world, but we are showing them, and they effects in the real kind of world thing. So actually, things are kind of an opposite way in the virtual reality things, and that's why we are now wondering three things we have to answer today. First, is there 3D maps? And I think that we will see some maps that you can say that they are 3D maps. If there are 3D maps, how to make a good 3D map, not just the perfect image of the real world. And the third question is there a place of cartography? Will the cartography still have a position when we are making those 3D environments or words or whatever you call that? And we are going to discuss all the way from that. But now I will leave the topic to the Pyry, who is actually a specialist in this, but I think that he's more specialist in the theoretical thinking. So he will actually give us a guidance what we should do and what we should have in our heads when we start to look those examples. So please, Pyry, the floor is yours.
Yep. Yeah. So the title you see on the screen, I didn't quite change it this time. My message is that usable 3D map forms with cartographic research. Just as Mika mentioned just before, it's quite a theoretical account to 3D map making and 3D map essence. I'm going to talk some conceptual things about 3D maps, but also many examples about how 3D maps can be taught, and certainly trying to respond to the question of the event: is 3D map understood? And also I try to remember the questions from Mika. My current work is as a research group leader at FGI GeoInfo, Department of Geoinformatics and Cartography in National Land Survey of Finland, and at the Finnish Geospatial Research Institute, where I work with my group on the topics of geospatial representation and interaction. And apparently 3D maps, whenever we have a possibility to go to them, we also study those. But just for you to understand a little bit of my background and from where I come to talk about this, I tell a little bit. Well, my hobbies with maps have begun on a very early age with orienteering sports, which apparently requires use of maps. Not so much 3D, but some 3D thinking by maps is also necessary in that hobby. Then I made a subject at the Helsinki University of Technology on cartography, which existed when I studied. Currently, I'm not quite sure if it exists. Please comment if it does. I hope so, or hopefully it will again. And this gave me some, so to say, official education to the topic too. Then I joined the cartographic research at the Department of Geoinformatics and Cartography in 2007, and have been studying these things at the department since those days. Also 3D maps. I have been acting in the International Cartographic Association, which is actually a very nice group and we can say global community, in fact, who gather every second year and also in several other occasions to discuss cartography and cartographic research, and to also sometimes ponder around 3D maps. My doctoral dissertation was on wayfinding landmarks and geopictures, and those times were my most active thinking and working with 3D maps. And I refer to many studies and many findings made those days. Luckily, these are topics that don't, at the theoretical base at least, they don't change too much. I've been designing NLS maps, which have given some cartographic practice with all the cartographers of the NLS, which is nice and also somewhat large group. And then leading the research as already told. This is the outline of my presentation, and to begin with the concepts and the most theoretical basis. Then going to understanding of 3D maps and what are the, we can even say, psychological aspects there. Continuing to use experiments in research which have been done on the topics, and then summarizing in the end. So let's begin with the theory, as a researcher so much likes to do, and particularly researcher likes to begin with definitions. So of course we need to look what a map as such would be by researchers and by authorities. This International Cartographic Association has given one of the first, so to say, outwritten or widely acknowledged definition of a map, which is quite lengthy one, as you can see to the left here. Then our Finnish cartographer Osmo Niemelä has given an account. From France, there has been a definition, and latest I refer to Kraak, former president of the International Cartographic Association, and I would say globally networked and a long-time cartographer who really has authority to say this with all other authors of the book. That is, by the way, a very nice cartographic book, latest from 2020. About maps, map designs, and map issues related to UN sustainability goals as well. So all these definitions give a word representation or visual presentation or geometric representation or some such term in them, which certainly refers to a very visual output, which then we can be interpreted as a map. But sometimes, and actually in this latest definition by Kraak, he also mentions that it's often a visual representation, so other kinds of representations should not be excluded, but certainly in this presentation, I also refer to the visual reality and in the context of 3D maps, visuality is certainly the main point. Then with definitions, it's always a little bit intriguing again to think what then would not be a map in this case. So, when this topic is discussed and thought around, quite typically we come to the conclusion that some directly sensed data, like remote sensing data, or some raw format data, like raw vector data, is not a map itself. Well, it's data, of course, but then when we visualize and display it, we can think if it's a map already. Maybe not yet, but refining and enriching these directly sensed data and raw data, the definition of a map certainly gets closer. So in the conceptual sense, we could say that this annotated map down here is a map by definition. Although then, of course, with maps, we always come quite rapidly to the quality of the maps and begin to think if the map is really a map because of its quality. But by definition, this would be how this goes. Well, then, of course, I want to take my account to defining terms and key terms, and I can easily follow the earlier seen definitions. But what I would like to add from my education, but also from my experience, is that map is always purpose-driven. Maps can be so different and they can be designed and drawn so many ways that they must have some kind of purpose in them to make them sensible in the end. They need to be refined somehow, as we saw before, from the data sources, and they also always apply some kind of generalization. Whatever accurate the map is, some generalization is applied in there. It's a pictorial representation, and it shows features in space and also time. As Mika also mentioned, time dimension maps are more and more common and easily made these days. Well, then, going to the real topic of the day, what then is the difference between 2D map and 3D map, as we commonly hear to be said and popularly talked about? And I would say that it's all about projecting. In a very theoretical sense, we can think that there are not very many pure 3D maps. In fact, all maps are somehow projected from the three-dimensional reality. And they apply a map projection, which typically comes from by projecting the globe to the cartographic plane from the largest scale, and then some further map projection adjustments, probably in addition to that. But to 3D maps, most interesting is the display projection, which is actually the geometric transformation from the cartographic, if we think about cartographic data as objects that are ready to be drawn, then display projection actually brings those objects to the display and to the 2D plane where we typically look at maps. Yeah, that's a limitation for today's talk. I'm talking about maps projected on 2D, not holograms yet, although they certainly can be maps as well. So then a common concept of a 3D view is that actually what makes a map a 3D map as we think about it, seeing objects of land and of environment in 3D. We typically think about oblique views from some kind of either, well, not necessarily that much first-person perspective, because then we don't see very large area, but rather a third view perspective and seeing objects from above in an oblique projection. And which certainly is very effective for us human beings, as this way the 3 dimensions become visible as in real life, but like in a bird eyes view, still in for more wide area. I'll show some examples very soon. And then this display projection, which is the graphical transformation magic, so to say, affects a lot the geometrical properties of a 3D view. What would the accuracy of distances be as if measured from the view? What would be the accuracy of angles be on the display? How large the represented area actually can be on the picture, and how much features are occluded due to the 3-dimensional projection, because this is maybe the most central problem of 3D maps, so to say, that tall features occlude features behind them, and in that sense they break a little bit one important cartographic rule, which is to show the environment as comprehensive and show the features of the environment as comprehensively as possible. And these things can be played around with the projection choices. I show a couple of projections to choose from, mainly the ones mostly used. And perspective projection is certainly the one which is most known for us as human beings, as our vision of the world is very close to perspective projection in real life. And therefore, this is certainly also very much used in different kinds of 3D representations, also quite much in 3D maps. And the mathematical basis is that the projection rays pass the punctual projection center in one point there. And then there are some geometrical properties like non-parallel lines intersecting the display plane in vanishing points. And then 1 to 3 vanishing points that maybe many of us, maybe all of us have learned at school to draw a perspective with vanishing points. So these are particularly related to perspective projection. Parallel projections, on the other hand, these projection rays to the 2D plane are parallel, and they are also the parallel lines which are parallel in this feature, this 3D feature that is being mapped, are mapped parallel on display plane. And this causes that these projections project features distance-wise and metrically very correctly. And that is why actually these parallel projections are very fit for cartography, for example, because distances and to some amount also angles keep in correct relations with between the features and inside the map image. There are many types of projections in this group, and they have been named differently, like in orthographic projections, economic projections, which is quite much related to the particular choices of the setting of this projection and And then in oblique parallel projections, there's cavalier projection and cabinet projection, for example. Cabinet projection, I would think quite commonly used in military courses, for example. So those are the main groups of display projections, and maybe the parallel ones would be better fit for the 3D maps, although perspectives are used as well. But then there are a huge lot of different kinds of combinations and enriching solutions for these projections as well. This may be made curving, like in the example figure here. The top of the image is made curving to imitate the globe. And then these may be combined together computationally, as in this case, the front of the image is from in a certain parallel projection. I memorize it's the oblique parallel projection, and then of course these are often made also to move to illustrate the terrain even better and to enable exploration of the terrain. Some examples of the types of 3D maps which have been particularly noted by a cartographer like me. Particularly interesting here, well, actually these are all quite interesting. Maybe I talk them through in each of them. So this draped 2D map, for example, it's quite an interesting idea because actually it's a 2D map. It's made for a plane, projected. The features are projected to the cartographic plane in the first hand, but then again it's draped on a 3D view, on a digital elevation model to become a 3D view. And this actually makes it quite readable in a way because the and now it's projected in perspective projection in this case, and it makes a nice and interesting, very like cartographic, but at the same time somewhat realistic effect, where things and features can possibly be quite easily read. Then the wireframe map is good for the cartography because it leaves lots of white space or lots of empty space on the map and can allow adding features or highlighting some features particularly. This silhouette sketch is a little bit more artistic already, can show the forms of the hills interestingly and nicely, and also in the similar way as we might see while looking at sceneries in the real world. And the surface shading map then goes also to the direction of full-made computer graphics where transparencies can be defined and some visibility is provided to features in this way. Well, then of course, to end the definition section, let's take then what would be the definition of a 3D map. These definitions haven't really been written in similar authoritative sense as for a map or academically, so to say. But when thinking about this myself, I became to the conclusion actually it's the oblique display projection and the oblique viewing projection that makes maps 3D and just as discussed before. So there's, to my thinking currently, there's not too much more about that. Then there are lots of details that follow, but those we can also discuss later. And yes, I wanted also to take this negative definition here because actually when we make so-called 2D maps where we use data projected on a cartographic plane, we still may dimensionally, like in this hill shading example in Lapland. But still, this wouldn't be by definition counted as a 3D map. Hey, then still more closer to the topic of the day. Understanding of 3D maps. It relates mainly to the acquisition of spatial knowledge, for which a more psychological model has been established by Siegel and White in 1975, and then this has been refined later, lots discussed and so on, but it's still pretty valid, and concentrates on three types of knowledge that form the understanding of space by features to human beings, and that would be landmark knowledge for identifying what are called landmark features, meaning features in the environment that we recognize and by which we create our understanding of space. Route knowledge, which combines landmarks of the landmark knowledge together in order to make for a person possible to move through routes and understand the sequential order of the landmarks on those routes. And then a configuration of knowledge, which is seen as the most developed form of the spatial knowledge and formed by getting combinations, by getting the two landmark knowledge and route knowledge work together and become together, like we can. I need to change the mic still. Oh, yes, got some instructions as well. Very nice, thank you. So these are the three types of spatial knowledge as people tend to organize the space in their minds. Then for evaluating geopictures and how these types of spatial knowledge can be acquired from geopictures in the large sense, meaning maps and similar representations, we created a capability for spatial knowledge acquisition, and there we have a vantage point which defines a lot what kind of information can be acquired, meaning the perspective point, or there are many names for this viewing point. Visibility of vertical features, which basically means how much the vertical features like facades of buildings can be seen on the picture, on the map. And third, visual realism, meaning how realistically the image is drawn and the map or the geopicture is drawn. We evaluated in that evaluation these 7 map types, which represent some commonly used map types and widely drawn map types, and found their support for spatial knowledge. And I just want to highlight this oblique 3D drawing, which was the most close to a 3D map in this study. Actually, it is the one, if you see my, well, the cursor is not visible, but it's in the middle on the right, which is this oblique 3D drawing. Mainly, we can call it a 3D map simply. And then just to rapidly note about animated and dynamic 3D maps, which are probably somehow the most common and most seen maps for people, as these are very widely used in navigators and gaming. And I believe maybe these kinds of maps and in other applications as well will be shown to us by next presenters. This was just to remind about like maybe the widest use of 3D maps anyway. And then the user experiments. There are many results in science about using 3D maps. And one of them is that 3D maps are actually very effective for wayfinding, for navigating routes in complex urban environments, which is quite natural as it's possible to effectively see the environment routes not only in horizontal but also in vertical directions. And particularly here, the display being a map, meaning showing a generalized view, not a direct photo only, is important because it gives a person a direct access to thinking of the environment, to understanding the essential features of the environment for moving. Then already quite early, it has been found in experiments that low visual realism enhances the rapid acquisition of configurational knowledge, meaning this knowledge which is our comprehensive understanding of the environment. And this basically means what I just said for the wayfinding in complex urban environments, that with low visual realism we get more understandable maps made. And also it has been seen many times that low visual realism is preferred over photorealism in navigation, exactly because of the easiness to read the generalized map-like presentations. We ran an eye tracking experiment on this topic also, where we had this kind of very experimental 3D map on the right top side of the slide, and we found that it is viable. It was seen differently from the more traditional contour and hill shading elevation methods, but it was particularly good for free view reading of the map, meaning tasks like selecting the highest point on the map or reading the route or selecting the route on the map. So it seemed that people with this kind of map where oblique parallel projection is used and some occlusion is present, people are able to more easily see the places of hills and the elevation relationships, even more so than with the hill shading, which actually is a very strong cue already. There have been many studies about interactive 3D map user interfaces as well. And to take a couple of them, I can refer to Finnish research from 2009, when at the Helsinki University of Technology, Antti Oulasvirta and company studied 3D environments with those days phones, which were certainly very simple, but and the displays were small compared to these days, but these were the early results which have been repeated since then some time too, and showing that actually 3D map is good in pointing particular features in the environment, but it's difficult for navigators, as in this experiment, to navigate on the phone. So moving the display is so difficult, and actually following the movement of the display was so difficult, even though this was a game-like environment, so very well made. But still, people have difficulty in following the structure of the environment when moving in the virtual world. And I guess we all know this from computer games and so that some kind of 2D representation or map is always beneficial to understand how the virtual environment actually too is structured. And then also they found that users' performance enhances, particularly in the case when the users are able to use 2D-like strategies, so begin to think 2D. And maybe this is the reason why 2D maps too are still made, as they are cognitively easier to read for people, and because so many of the activities in reality happen on a very planary environment on the Earth's surface. But 3D maps certainly can provide lots of benefits as well. I'm coming to the summary and finishing with that 3D map is essentially an oblique view of a geographical area, as we saw in the definition part of the talk. The display projection importantly defines the qualities of a 3D map, and there is much more to that than I could present. 3D maps potentially allow rich spatial knowledge for readers, meaning the evaluation that I showed told that there are more spatial knowledge to be acquired than even from 2D maps, even though there are these some difficulties. And then in the end, to respond to the question of the seminar from my part, I think we can say that 3D maps are naturally well understood, but we always need to keep in mind that this occlusion prevents full comprehensiveness to the view of the environment, and then that interactive use is difficult for most people, and those are some limitations that must be very much taken into use when designing and building 3D maps. We have some writings visible there from mostly the work that I presented from our part, and I thank you for your attention and also for the extra time that I had to use, and I welcome questions, comments, discussion, and we certainly also continue those with the next presentations.
Yeah, thank you, Guru. Very nice presentation, and I'm not sure if I'm more confused with 3D. I was confused already in the beginning when I was thinking about 3D cartography, and my first thought now is about how long does it take for us to develop the 3D cartography to the level where 2D cartography is today. Because if you think about 2D cartography, it's been developed during what? Hundreds of years. People have been using 2D maps to show information, and it's generation and generation. So what do you say? How long does it take for us that the 3D maps are complete?
A very good question. In a way, I believe that actually, and in the technological sense of databases, it might not take very long. Of course, for that we need very complete 3D models. But with point clouds, we already have quite much of that, and then refinement of these point clouds is continuing very heavily, and the data models of the NLS are also being, for example, of the National Land Reserve of Finland and in companies in large part are being developed so that that we get this abstract data, this generalized data out of them. And it means that we have the possibilities to draw these maps, to render these maps, but certainly the cartographic point of view is still to be developed in order to find the, so to say, the most efficient ways to select the correct features for different kinds of objects that we have on Earth. And I guess this modeling part is the most complicated part for creating the so to say complete 3D map. But depending on the resources and on the efforts we put on it, it certainly is very well technologically possible. Not an exact answer, but.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think that you would need to have a crystal ball to see the answer for this, but we do have interesting presentations after the break for getting different views. But from the audience for Pyry's presentation or the general topic, do we have any questions here? Oh, there's something on chat, so let's take that. And Mika is somewhere there also. You should. Oh yeah, just open your camera and shoot your question, Mika.
I actually can't open the camera, but I can shoot my question. I picked up the phrase of low visual realism is preferred. So my topic is, does this mean that this is actually the cartography in the 3D, so that you don't show everything, but you actually think what you are showing, and that is the low visual realism. But then added to that, when Google is now updating their navigation skills, they are planning to show the guidance in that way that you point your phone to the real world, and they are adding, using authentic realism, to adding up symbols to that view, the camera view. Is that actually something that is related to cartography? And how can they actually do that? Because that's the idea, that they actually put symbols in our world, in a world that we see at the moment, not actually even the modeled world that is there in the 3D models. Did you get my idea?
Yes, I guess, do you mean that Google is planning to make smartphones as pointing devices in the real world in order to highlight objects on the display?
Yeah, because authentic reality, you can already do that, the kind of things that you can see when you are pointing your camera in your device. You can see things from the that are not there in the real world. But my understanding is that the next way of navigating, at least when you are walking, is that you are pointing the camera and it actually puts the symbology in there. Is that also a map? Because that is map symbols, where you should go, where is the cafe and things like that. And there is a picture behind that, even though that it's a real picture from where you are.
Yes, we go really to the essence of the definition of the map again, and this is, I could categorize this as a very interactive cartography, so to say. I mean, certainly this representation becomes a map in the sense of the definition when it's extracted from the environment and highlighted separately on the display. Although then maybe the geographical area in this case is very limited. So in that sense, myself, coming from the traditional cartography, I wouldn't count that a map yet, because map essentially pictures a wider geographical area as well. But in the sense of generalization, it certainly is generalized geodata and cartographic in that sense.
interesting still. I was thinking of this Google being involved here, and as they tend to show the way that we act and do our things in our lives with their products and solutions, I'm a little bit scared that we don't get the high science of cartography to this 3D world if we are led by Google. Luckily, we have the first part of the seminar in English, so wider audience from Google can also respond to our worries on this. I was actually discussing with a few people from Google in Amsterdam a few weeks ago. Okay, we do have some comment here.
Hello, everybody. I'm Antti Nurminen. Is this okay? So we have problems with microphone. So I have done research on 3D maps about 20 years now. I got interested around 2002 when we were doing a new project, and I basically developed this system you were showing, but which we tested with Antti. For me, it was first a technical challenge, and I showed that these fully textured mobile city maps have been possible for the past 23 or 24 years already. So first, it was a technological breakthrough. We made our first demo in 2005. Then after technical stuff, we started doing this like use cases for navigation. Then I was working with Antti for several years, and we made something like half a dozen of experiments. The latest was finally released in Mobile HCI last year. And we compared, I compared AR as in the sense of Google 6 years ago, but just published last year.
Great to hear.
And for me, I've been trying to figure out what is the best use case for 3D maps. And for me, it's like the proximal environment. The cognitive distance between the representation and environment is shorter in 3D map. So we need all the details we can, not the abstract, all the details. But that applies for just the proximal visible environment just around you. You can recognize it easily. So this last experiments where we compared AR, it's not the first, but it's the last. We were in Tampere and we tried to figure out, sorry about this, always something like this. If the microphone doesn't work, then there's another interruption.
No worries.
So we compared AR, the official road planning app map from Tampere, and a 3D representation, which was accurate. We made a very updated map. 3D was, the oblique view of 3D map was super good. AR sucked. It sucked so bad I couldn't even publish it because the AR reviewers didn't accept the results. 2D map sucked. Again, they are using now map data which is not accurate enough. It's not accurate enough for the use case. As you said earlier, you need to have a purpose. If your purpose is to find a bus stop from this area where you have a dozen bus stops, then you need accurate data, not large scale, but small scale and details. And you need features that you can use for reference when you are orienting your mind, trying to find your actual target. And if you lack those details, if it's too abstract, you fail. That's my feedback. So I'm really happy that this event is taking actually place. Thank you very much. After 20 years of research, I finally see this event. Thank you. Right, so that's just my $1 million for this.
Oh, yes, thank you very much, Antti. I'm so happy to see you here because I remember we also discussed at those times when we began this, like our account to this idea and began thinking from the very cartographic points of view. And then it became the combination with 3D graphics, of course, very rapidly. And that was how it also like the community of 3D modeling certainly and 3D graphics has been very important, and like the first accountants on this task, because not that much cartography has developed the 3D graphics as itself, but then from the cartographic point of view we certainly try to evaluate how it affects. And I fully agree with you that the essential details are important, and that comes to the purpose of the map. which is central for making each map, and it can be also very detailed objects, in fact, that might be the important ones for some purpose, like moving around in a city, which is the typical example in these studies, which people easily recognize and are ready to put in their mind and actually memorize as well. Memorizability of objects and of important objects is very central here, and there the cartographic generalizing of choosing the correct objects to be displayed from the environment is very central.
My comment on the future of 3D maps and 3D models would be that we need analytical 3D models, where you have all these labels and like company logos analytically represented in the data so that you can emphasize them. If you just like we have done usually just textures where we take a photograph, but that's not analytical. It's just one photograph and one texture. But if you are trying to find something like McDonald's, okay, you need the McDonald's logo, emphasize that, show that. You try to find a bus stop, emphasize that. So you need this kind of analytical 3D model, not just a textured model. And that's where you should be going. Like if you just have a point cloud, it's very difficult to do that kind of semantic analytical selection of anything. So that's just my point for the 3D modeling part.
And nice to hear that too. It exactly means that we should get from the remote sensing data to the vectorized data and generalized data in that sense. But I guess we are quite getting close to the end of our time, if I'm correct.
Yeah, well, we could wrap up this part of the seminar, unless there are any other questions anywhere. And thanks, Antti, for your comments. That was really interesting. I began thinking of how there's only large scale 3D maps. You don't actually need them in small scale because you're looking so far away that who cares about the dimensions at that. And then again, in large scale, of course, all the details are, it's like more challenging. You have more data, more accurate data. And so pretty interesting. Okay, Paula wants to say something. Great. Go ahead, Paula.
Yes, hello. Thank you. Thank you, Pyry, for your presentation. And thank you, Andy, for interesting points. I would add to what you have just mentioned about these maps showing large areas, so being small scale maps or presentations or 3D, whatever. Who cares about the definitions? What is important is that we get information about the environment. Okay, I liked very much Pyry's presentation of the definitions as well, so it's important. But anyway, what is an important issue in 3D maps and 3D presentations of the third dimension is, as Pyry said already, this relationship between the XY dimension and the Z dimension. It's okay if we are interested in finding a route in the present location. We are looking at the small area, and we can really go into details of the height differences. But we of course can have also those maps, 3D maps that are showing large areas. But then we also need to have relatively high differences in this Z dimension. And I think we will get an example of that also in the afternoon. Another thing which took my attention in Pyry's presentation was this occlusion thing. That is certainly a problem when we are having some kind of a perspective view. But if we think about two-dimensional maps, there we can also present occluded objects. It's possible to a certain extent that we present something that is underground, for instance, tunnels or something like that. But it's always, if we are also showing the visible things, then it means that there is some additional load visually in the map. And I think that may be a problem with 3D maps. We can certainly draw something that is not visible to human viewers, but exists there behind. But if in 3D world, 3D presentation, we have a lot of that information, then there is no space enough anymore, and then this visual load becomes too high. So there are those possibilities that are common for 2 and 3 dimensional maps also. Okay, let's continue.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. You want to comment something, Pyry? Or?
Yes, thank you, Paula. You are exactly correct in your comments. These are the design points of view, and there are solutions to those where I didn't really go with this restricted time. But for example, for the small differences of elevation on the Earth surface, as in relation to the horizontal dimensions, certainly things like contours are very efficient, and that again shows how 2D map has somehow overwhelmed the scene well for centuries, but then bringing these into maybe exaggerated with exaggerated heights, as in some of the examples here, and probably also later today. I think communicative power can increase, and dynamic and interactive user interfaces can solve some problems of occlusion as well.
Okay, thank you, Pyry. Maybe we now head for the break. Originally, we were supposed to have another keynote here from the gaming industry, and unfortunately, at the last minute, that failed. But there was so much to discuss on this theory part already. That means that I think this is not the last seminar on the 3D topic either. So we will continue later. But the English part of the seminar is now more or less complete. So let's have a break. Come back at 2:30. Elikkä nyt mennään tauolle ja jatketaan 2:30. Meillä on siellä 4 kappaletta case studyja, joiden kautta sitten asiaa pohditaan sitten tällä kotimaisella kielellä. Olkaa hyvä, menkää siellä kotona kahvikoneiden ääreen ja palataan 14:30.